Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I-24 News. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has returned home from Washington, heading straight into military consultations after a night of heavy fire as Israeli aircraft bombed Gaza targets and the Strip's militants fired rockets into Israel. Netanyahu speaking via satellite Tuesday to the AIPAC conference in Washington after abruptly returning home to deal with the escalation of violence with Gaza's Hamas rulers after a long-range rocket struck a home in central Israel, injuring 7 family members.
We are prepared to do a lot more. We will do what is necessary to defend our people and to defend our state.
Meanwhile, senior Israeli officials say there is no ceasefire with Hamas, with IDF troops remaining on the border with Gaza following a major escalation. Speaking on army radio, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz says a reported ceasefire brokered by Egypt is untrue. This as residents in southern communities endured a terrifying night with sirens sounding as more than 80 rockets were launched from Gaza into Israel. The Israeli army says its Iron Dome defence system intercepted some of them as Israel launched strikes on 15 Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, with confirmation on Monday night that the office of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has been destroyed. And let's go now to our defence correspondent Daniel Semak, who is standing by on the Israel-Gaza border. Daniel, thank you. Despite reports of this ceasefire, we're now hearing that Palestinians are launching burning and explosive balloon toward Israel. What more can you tell us there, and can we expect a response from Israel?
Well, Sarah, indeed, we have already heard officially that there have been incendiary balloon and explosive balloon launches. Some of those incendiary devices indeed exploded on Israeli territory in open areas such as the one I'm standing in right now, and not causing any injury or damage. There is a report, though, according to an agricultural worker here in the nearby Eshkol Regional Council, there was an incendiary balloon that indeed started a fire. That fire has since been put out. We also heard from the Israeli military announcing that in the last few hours there was an infiltration of Palestinians from within the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory. They set an Israeli army post on fire. That army post was not manned at the time, so it did not result in any injuries there, but definitely certain extreme incidents that have already taken place in this unofficial ceasefire. At least as far as Israel is concerned, there has not been an official word of any ceasefire that Israel agreed to. That being said, we have seen some semblance of quiet restored in that we have not seen any rocket launches or mortar launches in the last several hours. We also heard earlier that the train was going to restart, but now there's word out that that train that was supposed to start southbound from Ashkelon towards Sderot is actually stopped because a projectile was found along the train tracks. Very important to note here that that directive has since been rehanded down, that train will be stopped for the time being, Sarah.
And Daniel, we are seeing a number of tanks there behind you. Tell us, how long can we expect this fortified presence of Israeli Defence Forces troops there on the border?
Well, it's a very important question, Sarah. For now, we can't say anything about the amount of forces here decreasing. On the contrary, we actually arrived here several hours ago, and in front of us was a convoy of Israeli tanks that were heading towards this area. This is obviously one of the main gathering points of this heavy machinery, but we also saw earlier some tanks heading closer to the border, maybe closer to Israeli border communities. So we are not seeing any signs that suggest that the Israeli army presence on the ground here is decreasing, even though in many other ways the calm is being partially restored. As far as the Israeli military is concerned, they're not taking a step back at all, Sarah.
Okay, defence correspondent Daniel Semak, thanks for bringing us up to date there. Dozens of Hamas rockets this morning rained down on southern Israeli skies, with 50 launched late last night, continuing into the early morning hours. There were no injuries, but a home in the southern city of Sderot suffered a direct hit. Residents there are frustrated by the IDF's response so far to these attacks.
If we don't hit them hard, not on the ground, but bomb them and bomb them heavily, so the Hamas heads don't emerge from the shelters, then maybe, we start hitting them one by one. That will deter them. But if it's like yesterday at 3 in the morning, there was a ceasefire at 10, and at 3 in the morning you hear the sirens and you run like a rat in the house to hide, then what can you do? You have to stop this bedlam. This way or that way, decide. Ceasefire, peace, then peace, or eliminate them.
Meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza say the IDF bombing caused a substantial amount of damage and they're worried for the future of their families.
I don't know what to tell you. Where are we supposed to live? Our children and families have become homeless. We don't know where to go anymore.
And let's go now to our correspondent Eylon Levy, who is standing by in southern Israel. Eylon, tell us, what are you hearing from residents there on the ground?
Sarah, if I had to describe the reaction of residents here in Netivot, I would call it steely frustration. Frustration because no one here has any illusions that there are any imminent solutions to the problem of Gaza. These rocket attacks are something that they have become used to. They are a regular occurrence. The last siren here was this morning. People here we've spoken to want the government to hit Hamas hard, but they're not under any illusion that will make the problem go away, only keep it under control. But at the same time, steely, because people here are continuing with their routines as much as possible. It's not entirely possible, but in as much as possible, continuing with their routines, understanding this is a frustrating reality, but one that cannot force them to simply give up on their lives as they choose to live them and continue studying and working and living.
And Eylon, we know that there may be some demonstrations planned there for tonight, and also schools were closed today in the south. So tell us, when can we expect them to really get back to normal life?
Indeed, Sarah, when you and I were younger abroad, we had snow days here in southern Israel. They have rocket days. Under instructions from the Israeli Home Front Command in the army, no schools were open in the south of Israel today. All schools were closed. And that doesn't mean children are out in the street playing. It means they're at home, probably in or near their protective space in case there is another rocket attack. In addition, the Home Front Command has also instructed there be no gatherings of more than 300 people in closed spaces, and people may only go to work if they can run to a bomb shelter in the time that they have, which in this area is around 30 seconds. Those home front commands are updated at 5 in the morning, and that's when we'll know whether the army is telling people it's time to go back to your normal routines, or if the situation kicks off again overnight, whether they'll say, hunker down, we're in for a bumpy ride. Sarah.
And Eylon, just very briefly, how concerned are people that an escalation may be on the cards tonight?
It's an entirely eminently probable reality, Sarah. People wouldn't be surprised if it happens, especially since what happened last night. People expressing frustration that it is Hamas that seems to be dictating the order of the ceasefires, not the IDF determining the order of the action. So people think it's absolutely possible that there might be another escalation. But again, we're giving this extra focus because of a rocket that landed in central Israel. They say rockets land here frequently. They often have rocket alarms. It doesn't become major international news. So the situation that is happening now, certainly an escalation that has been rare in the last 3.5 years, but not a completely impossible occurrence. They've been here before. They'll be here again. Sarah.
Yes, certainly. Eylon Levy in Netivot in Israel South, thanks for the update. Naftali Bennett, Education Minister in Netanyahu's cabinet, who's been criticising him for not responding strongly enough to rockets from Gaza, telling Reuters television that he would open the gates of hell on Hamas if he becomes Defence Minister.
If it's up to me as Defence Minister of the State of Israel, if I get that job, I'll open gates of hell on this terror organization of Hamas and fix the situation once and for all.
And we're going out for a short break, but when we come back, we'll have all the latest from the AIPAC conference in Washington. Stay with us.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
Unflinching, opinionated, weeknights David Schuster and Tal Heinrich bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Nurit Ben.
And I'm Kalev Ben David.
Join us right here on The Rundown for the global headlines defining the day.
Plus in-depth interviews and debates that take you inside the Middle East.
To the stories born out of this region and the massive impact they have all the way to Washington.
The Rundown on I-24 News.
Where the Middle East meets the world.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's go now to the US's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And speaking via satellite at the AIPAC conference, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says support for Israel comes both from the Democrats and Republicans, adding that's how it's always been and how it always should be, thanking US President Donald Trump for all of the historic decisions he's made.
The Golan Heights is indispensable for our defense. It's part of our history. When you put a shovel in the ground there, what you discover are the ruins of ancient synagogues. Jews lived there for thousands of years, and the people of Israel have come back to the Golan. Israel holds the high ground, and we shall never, ever give it up. It's part of Israel.
And for more on this story, let's go now to our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, who is standing by in our DC bureau. Dan, thank you. We've just heard what Netanyahu has to say here, and we know there's a lot of support for Israel from the Republicans, but tell us, can we say the same for the Democrats?
Well, keep in mind that here in Washington on day 3, the last day of the annual conference of AIPAC, there were 18,000 members, and almost all of them showed up for the morning session in which Prime Minister Netanyahu was addressing them by satellite from Tel Aviv. From time to time, by the way, the satellite link wasn't good. They missed some of the lines that he had, but he wanted to thank the United States, and in particular President Trump, for recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. Now, in the audience, AIPAC is a mixed group. There are Republicans, there are Democrats. Increasingly in recent years, there seem to be more Republicans, and the Republicans say that they and President Trump are 100% with Israel, and frankly, they agree with Netanyahu. Liberal Democrats aren't so sure about Netanyahu, but they are glad that the U.S. and Israel are very closely aligned right now. The Democrats, you might say, are, well, you know, kind of almost sorry that there are right-wing leaders in both Israel and the U.S. On the other hand, there are progressive or very liberal Democrats who aren't happy with Netanyahu at all, and there's the divide in the Democratic Party. But leaders of that party came and addressed the conference, too, and they were very pro-Israel, Sarah.
OK, Dan, stay with me, and let's turn now to the annual conference of the Israeli lobby organisation, which is known as AIPAC. And our Tal Heinrich caught up with Republican Senator Ted Cruz to hear what he has to say about US President Donald Trump formally recognising Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
Well, no, I was not surprised. So I've been in conversations with the president and the White House and National Security Council about doing this for many months. It was the right thing to do. I'm very grateful that President Trump recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. It is unquestionably part of Israel, and no one in their right minds would want to see the Golan Heights under the control of Bashar Assad or the Iranians or the Russians. And so the president did the right thing.
And Dan, tell us, what else are we hearing following Trump's recognition of the Golan Heights, and what do you have to make of what Cruz has to say here?
Well, everyone's wondering about the reasons for Trump's decision and the timing. Trump clearly did it during the Israeli election campaign, just 15 days before your April 9th election in Israel. So was Trump trying to help Netanyahu? Frankly, everyone assumes yes. But there were other reasons as well, and Senator Ted Cruz mentioned them. For instance, Iran. Iran has forces in Syria now, and so the U.S. and Israel feel that Iran has to have a clear message. The U.S. and Israel stand together. Iran had better not even approach the Golan Heights. And as I say, everyone's buzzing about the reason for this. One other thing, the more liberal wing, if you will, of the pro-Israel community wonders, what if Israel decides to annex the West Bank, also captured in 1967? Would Donald Trump go for that? As of now, the atmosphere in the Trump White House seems to be all pro-Israel. Sarah?
And Dan, let's move on now. And here's US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking at AIPAC, where he drew a standing ovation when he made it clear that the White House believes opposing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state is hatred.
Let me go on record. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The Trump administration opposes it unequivocally, and we will fight for it relentlessly.
Meanwhile, controversial Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has just reacted to Netanyahu's speech, tweeting this from a man facing indictments for bribery and other crimes in 3 separate public corruption affairs. Next. And Dan, coming back to you now, tell us, how much was anti-Semitism actually discussed at the AIPAC conference, and how much did it actually bother people who were there in attendance?
It came up in a lot of speeches, by the way, Sarah, in large part because of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and her recent remarks that when Americans support Israel, what they're showing is allegiance to a foreign country, and her suggestion that it's Jewish money or AIPAC money. As she tweeted a couple of months ago, it's all about the Benjamins, referring to the $100 bill with Benjamin Franklin on it. Therefore, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, said as part of his speech by satellite, take it from me, it's not all about the Benjamins. Also, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, he was here. He's known as being very, very pro-Israel. Among other things, he said that the United States supports Israel not for the Benjamins, but for David and Sarah and Leah. And then he even went with obviously Christian names for Christopher and Mary, for Jesus, for Maria, and even for all the Mohammeds and Noors. And so what the Trump administration, through Ambassador Friedman, was trying to say was that it's in America's interest, and they claim in everyone's interest, to be pro-Israel, rejecting Ilhan Omar's thought that it doesn't make sense for America to support Israel. A last thing, AIPAC is very much an American organization, not the Israeli lobby. It's America's pro-Israel lobby. Sarah?
And Dan, we know that the AIPAC conference is ongoing right now, so tell us, what were some of the main highlights that came up today?
Yeah, it's nearly over now. There were speeches, in fact, by Republicans and Democrats. The top Democrat in the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and she gave a speech that said that the Democratic Party, just like Republicans, is very supportive of Israel. And she condemned anti-Semitism, but there were members of AIPAC who said, why didn't she clearly condemn Ilhan Omar? The general message you get from Democrats at AIPAC, which is winding up today, is that the Democratic Party has a few people who are anti-Israel or want to really push Israel to move quicker toward peace with the Palestinians. But most of the Democratic Party takes the old-fashioned view, like most Americans, that they really like Israel. That's where things stand. It certainly has been an interesting conference, Sarah.
It certainly has. Dan Raviv in D.C., thank you very much. Let's stay in Washington, where a new political battle is brewing over the Mueller report. Democrats are demanding the full report be made public after the special counsel stopped short of exonerating the president on obstruction of justice. Meanwhile, Republicans and the White House are looking to turn the tables with a possible investigation of their own. Mona Kossar Abdi has the latest.
This morning, a changed political landscape in a post-Mueller Washington.
It's lasted a long time. We're glad it's over.
President Trump and his team celebrating the conclusion of the special counsel's 22-month investigation that found no collusion between Trump or his campaign with Russia, even complimenting the man he's long accused of leading a witch hunt.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Democrats have intensified their efforts to get Mueller's full report and have set an April 2nd deadline to hand it over.
We cannot simply rely on what may be a hasty, partisan interpretation of the facts.
Top Democrats feel Attorney General William Barr's summary of Mueller's report isn't objective because regarding the obstruction of justice investigation, Barr writes that there isn't enough evidence to prove that offense, even though Mueller doesn't exonerate the president.
This is a cheap shot. He either makes a decision for a prosecutor or not. This is unprofessional.
President Trump has been indifferent to the request.
Up to the Attorney General, but it wouldn't bother me at all.
Instead, the president has chosen to focus his efforts on suggesting another investigation.
There are a lot of people out there that have done some very, very evil things, very bad things, I would say treasonous things against our country.
Now, this week marks the 40th anniversary of the Camp David peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, an unimaginable accord at the time which brought historic foes to reconcile. But the deal left out Palestinians who at the time opposed the peace treaty. Now, 4 decades rather later, how do Palestinians view this accord? Our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim finds out.
It was a breakthrough in Middle Eastern diplomacy. Anwar Sadat, Jimmy Carter and Menachem Begin shaking hands, signing the Camp David peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The peace treaty marked the first time Israel won formal recognition from an Arab state. Former U.S. President Carter mediated what seemed at the time an impossible task. He had historic enemies ink the deal of their century.
الظروف العربية في ذلك الوقت كانت مختلفة.
The Arab position at that time was different. The Palestinian position was different. At that time, we were demanding Palestine from the sea to the river. The PLO only recognizes Palestine from sea to river. The Egyptian position and Sadat's position at the time was different from the Arab and Islamic position.
The agreement was not popular at the time of signing. Egypt was viewed as the leader of the Arab world, and signing a peace treaty with Israel didn't sit well with the Palestinians. Ziad Abu Zayyad, a former Palestinian minister, covered Sadat's historic visit to Israel as a journalist.
We felt betrayed, we felt very, very unhappy. We were against the visit. I was in Lod airport as a journalist at that time when Sadat stepped down from the airplane. I don't forget that I was crying. I was just looking at him, and my tears going down on my face, seeing Sadat coming out from the aeroplane and doing something which no one of us expected or wanted to see.
Fatah leader Ra'afat Al-Ayyan says, despite the harsh criticism of Sadat at the time, he deserves credit.
Everyone was against this bold step, but to his credit as a leader, he had a vision at the time of how to deal with the Israeli occupation.
Al-Ayyan says the treaty laid the foundation for future negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians.
This move has given the Arabs the courage to support and pressure the PLO to take this course, the course of negotiations with the Israelis, and a path to enter the dark tunnel of Oslo, which brought us to what we have reached.
The Palestine Liberation Organization signed its own peace treaty with Israel, the Oslo Accords in 1993. But the Palestinians believe they may have lost an opportunity by not taking part in the Camp David Accords.
Now, looking back, I think we should have joined the Camp David. Because at the time of Camp David Accords, the number of the Jewish settlers in the West Bank was about 16,000. And Menachem Begin accepted to freeze the settlement activities in the occupied territories for 6 months. And Anwar Sadat, he put the Palestinian flag on the table and wanted Arafat to go and participate in the meeting together with Menachem Begin. If we had been there with someone like Menachem Begin, I think we could have made a deal.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. But we will continue to update you on this fragile situation between Israel and Hamas. So do go ahead and visit us online. That's i24news.tv. And we're carrying all of those top stories on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and of course on Twitter. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.